Ja, Stefan, da hast du mir die Latte ja ganz schön hochgelegt. Also da kann ich nur noch aufrecht drunter durchgehen mit viel Glück. Okay, you also asked me to speak in English, and because I have such a belief in authorities, I have to bother you now with my Schwabian English. I'm talking about the renaissance of the space as a counter-reaction onto now nearly 2 decades of communication in the virtual space of the internet. I think you all have observed, let's say, over the last 5 to 8 years, this increasing amount of exhibitions where it opened about all these new museums which we have seen now opening up. We have every year an increasing number of visitors worldwide in the museums. And it's not only in the cultural realm, but it's also in the corporate one. So also a lot of corporates, big companies, they are shifting their communication budget from the traditional media like print, TV, also the internet. I consider the internet in the meantime as a traditional medium into the physical space. And we see all these brand spaces, all these corporate showrooms, all these brand museums. What is the reason for that shift from the virtual space into the physical space in communication? The reason is quite simple. After the widespread of the internet in the mid of the 90s, we were sitting alone at home in front of our computer, looking for information, looking for entertainment. And it seems that we now have the desire to go back in the physical space and to experience information, well-curated information together with other people. But there's a big difference to the times, the pre-digital times in spatial communication. People are now computer literated. They know exactly about the qualities of this new medium, interactivity, collaboration, networking, etc., etc. And they expect this now also to find this in the physical space. To discuss this, I have brought 3 projects with me, discuss this very practically, hands-on and making of wise, and this one project from a science museum, one from a brand museum, and one installation in public space. Starting with the Science Museum, between, I don't know exactly when it's more. Okay, I think they opened it up 3 years ago in Berlin. It's the Natural History Museum. It's partially renovated, and if you see this space, you don't want to see any medium in there. You don't want to see any flickering monitor, you don't want to see any projection in there. But as mentioned before, people expect this kind of digital communication or new media communication also in the physical space. So we achieved to at least camouflage 20 media installations in that space. One example are the so-called Jurassic copes. So we hide the medium into an everyday object, in this case into telescopes. And you can look through them and point onto the dinosaurs. And this is what you see. So you can pan around, and as soon as you have one of the dinosaurs in the center of your field of view, the thing locks, and the dinosaur becomes live. And you have a kind of time travel with him back into the Jurassic times. And we always have a kind of dialogue between the dinosaur and the visitor. And we have also a little kind of activity who explains why the dinosaur looks like it looks, in this case because he's eating from trees. So we have a direct correlation between the object and its explanation. Always have to animate it back into the posture of the museum, and then you're coming back into the presence. So you can do it with every of these different kind of dinosaurs. There's one big raptor, and there we allowed us a little bit a tougher kind of dramatizing its story. So he's eating something and has now fear that you are stealing his food, and then he behaves accordingly. Also vibrating loudspeakers on the floor, so it's a kind of experience. So, and back into the museum. Okay. So, the best usability studies you can do is looking into children's faces, and you see that the Raptor works. Or that you get the explanation that it's very nice how children are explaining their parents what they learn. That's a really big success. And that's the usual situation. So, and as you can see, you see nothing. There's no kind of technology in the museum, or in this case of the dinosaur hall, but there are a lot of explanation hidden and camouflaged into everyday objects. So the next project is a project in public space, an interactive installation in public space, which is one of the most interesting spaces for me personally. It's an installation which we did in Tokyo some years ago. It's an installation for a new development area in the center of Tokyo, close to a subway station, and the place where we installed our piece was a public sidewalk adjacent to an artificial pond. And the idea was here to make more a poetic piece, which is dealing with the duality between water waves and light waves, between physical and immaterial. And we installed here a 4x4 meter LED floor. So people are walking over, creating virtual ripples with the LEDs, which then become real ripples when they're coming to the water. So this duality between these both things. So some explanation. Yes, laser pointer. I'm totally stable. Okay, we have a LED matrix here. And we have opaque glass with weight cells, so we are measuring exactly where people are walking on. And from this point, we are creating these virtual ripples, which are then created as real ripples with this actuator array. A little bit of making of. So by purpose, we used monochrome white LEDs and covered them with opaque glass because we want to go as far as possible away from the notion of a monitor. So it's a very ephemeric light, it's not a monitor, which you see here. So we were very good in creating virtual ripples. That's a very old project we did 10 years ago for a Scottish whiskey museum. And so we used that code, but really tough was the physical ripple. So we did a lot of research. We came up with this kind of actuators and a complex software, and you see it's actually very precise what is then produced out of it. So set up on space, and that's now the final installation. So the idea was not to deliver a statue or a fountain, but something which on one hand reacts on the architectural situation, pathway, water, and on the other hand which reacts onto the visitors. So through their presence, they are changing the space. So they're changing this little piece of land through their presence, and this creates identification. So coming to the last project, that's a project for a brand museum. It's for the BMW Museum in Munich. We did a lot of interactive installations for this space, and one was for the very first space, which was dedicated to the design of a car. So usually if you tell a story about car design, you show talking heads of old designers talking about how they did the 507 in the whatever 50s. But we said we want to do something completely different, a kind of metaphorical narration telling the process of a car design. And we proposed to do it with a floating surface in space. So because a car is defined by a surface, and so we made a lot of experiments, how can we create a dynamic floating surface in space. So we made experiments with kind of web structures on ropes and motors, and then with these kinds of flaps, but also with fabric and all these things. But we ended up with spheres, with metal spheres. So we did the first simulation, and then the BMW people came to us and said, "Are you crazy? Do you want to tell the story of our car design with iron balls?" We said, yes, we are totally convinced, you know. And then they said no. So what we did then was a test setup, and that's always a good strategy. So we did a test setup with 25 spheres on servo motors, and also some kind of animations, and then they immediately agreed because they saw the physical object and they identified all their brand values. It's dynamic, it's challenging, it's precise, so all the things which are so important for them. And then they said, okay, we're going for it. And we also learned a lot about how can we tell stories with this more mesmerizing pixels in space. So we created a storyline. At the very beginning, there's no idea about how the car will look like in the future. It's white noise. Then the first abstract forms appears. And then you probably already see, okay, that's more a car probably from the 30s. Then what is very typical for a design process, competing forms appears. So it's very metaphorically spoken, so it's nothing very direct, like in the process, so it's a translation. And at the end, we have the car. So now this 2.5-minute compilation, probably we can bring down the lights a little bit, compilation from a 8.5-minute story which we are telling there in a permanent loop, explaining 5 different parts. concept and the programming and the test setup in-house. Then we're giving all this out in a workshop because we don't want to wire all these things here. Then for sure the storyboard in parallel, the content production, and at the very end there is a final installation in the workshop. And not everything is going straightforward and clear. We had an enormous disaster here. I explained it shortly. Usually every motor gets a positive or negative instruction. So go minus 50 centimeter down or go minus 100 centimeter down. And there we had a software bug which flips the positive and negative values. That means they get the instruction to go instead of 50 centimeter down, 50 centimeter up. That means self-destruction of a long time of work. So in seconds, presence. This was a half second of presence, very intense. Yeah, but at the end we achieved it. This is set up in the museum, and it was in a way successful, so that BMW is now using this kind of installation also to promote their new 5 Series. So from my experience, or my theory, it was the very first time that a spatial installation was influencing the traditional communication disciplines. Communication into the physical space, and even the media, the digital media in the physical space, they became also physical, as you have seen with the spheres at the very end. So there are a lot of projects out there. You can make a research in the internet, but I really advise you to go there physically and have a look with your personal presence, and probably you'll meet us there face by face. So thank you very much.